Wind howled across the mountains, swirling a mass of white snowflakes into twisting towers that rose and fell across the single-lane road. Icy flakes whipped against the windshield as Tara squinted into the gloom, desperately searching for a sign of shelter. She'd been making her way home from a business conference, never anticipating that the weather would turn from mild flurries into a relentless blizzard. The snow had piled up faster than any forecast had predicted, and the roads had become dangerously slick. In the dim headlights, she thought she spotted a wooden post, half buried by drifts. When she turned onto the smaller path with white-knuckled caution, she felt a tingling mixture of hope and dread. A battered wooden cabin, likely abandoned or used only in summer, emerged from the swirling haze. As she pulled up to it, the engine sputtered, as if relieved to finally rest. Tara realized she had no choice but to stop. As soon as she slid out from behind the wheel, the wind tore at her coat. She stumbled toward the cabin, boots crunching in snow up to her knees. With each step, swirling gusts threatened to send her sprawling. When she finally reached the weathered door, she discovered it was unlocked. Inside, the place was small but surprisingly tidy. A modest one-room structure, a sturdy table, and a stone fireplace. She could almost feel the old wood exhaling warmth from days long gone. Tara wasted no time stacking leftover logs in the hearth. She used a box of matches found in a corner to coax a timid flame into life. As she brushed off her coat, she noticed movement outside the frosted window. Another set of headlights appeared, fighting through the curtain of snow. A second traveler was coming, and the storm left them little option but to seek refuge here as well. For a moment, Tara braced herself, uncertain about who might enter. The door flew open, and a middle-aged man with ruddy cheeks and a thick parka staggered in, dragging 2 suitcases behind him. "I hope you don't mind me barging in," he said, breath billowing in the cold air. "My name's Lucas. Roads are a mess out there." Tara offered him a reassuring smile and gestured to the newly lit fire. Relief flooded his eyes as he dropped his luggage near the door. Before they could exchange further niceties, footsteps crunched outside again. The door opened once more to reveal a woman in a bright red coat, hair dusted with snow. "Hi," she said breathlessly. "Car battery died." With a sympathetic nod, Tara welcomed her, and soon the 3 of them were huddled around the flickering flames, grateful for the minimal warmth that began to seep through the cabin's single room. The storm's fury didn't abate. Within the hour, 2 more travelers took desperate shelter in the cabin. The first, an older woman named Mrs. Patel, arrived with a shy teenager in tow. She explained kindly that the girl was her granddaughter Priya, who had insisted on coming along for a weekend trip to see mountain wildlife. They wore matching knitted hats and exhaled in relief the moment they felt the fire's heat. The second newcomer was a wiry young man named Mateo, who apologized profusely for tracking slush across the floor even before he introduced himself. Exhaustion was palpable in the trembling of his voice. As they settled among the rest of the group, the little space suddenly felt cramped. Boots, heavy coats, and scarves were strewn about, forming small puddles of melted ice on the wooden floor. Outside, night was descending, and the wind shrieked like a furious banshee. Darkness arrived early, drawing everyone closer to the orange glow from the fireplace. When the meager supply of firewood stacked in the corner threatened to run out, Tara and Lucas volunteered to brave the bitter cold, to scavenge for branches outside. They returned with numb hands and half-frozen limbs, weighed down by a few meager logs. Even that modest effort was enough to keep the cabin tolerably warm. Together, the group rummaged through their belongings in search of anything edible. Mindy discovered 2 protein bars in her coat pocket, while Mateo unearthed a box of crackers from his backpack. Mrs. Patel gently patted Priya's shoulder, coaxing her to share the thermos of hot tea they had brought. Tara offered a couple of candy bars she had saved for a road snack. Placing everything on the table, they pieced together a motley feast for supper. It wasn't much, but it was something. In the flickering firelight, they ate in companionable silence. But as the meal progressed, a gentle curiosity sparked. Tara broke the hush with a question. "So, where were you all headed?" Lucas explained he was on his way to meet his newborn grandson for the first time. Mindy, twisting her red coat's button, admitted she was traveling across the state for a job interview, her last hope after a string of rejections. Mrs. Patel shared that this was Priya's first trip away from home since the girl's father had passed away a year earlier, eliciting murmurs of sympathy. Mateo confessed he'd been trying to outrun memories of a recent heartbreak, hoping the mountains might heal him. One by one, each story filled the small room with a sense of shared vulnerability. Something in the air grew warmer, intangible yet powerful, a sense of mutual understanding. As the clock inched toward midnight, the wind outside pummeled the walls. The group laid out a patchwork of blankets and coats on the floor, trying to make a shared sleeping area. Despite the cramped conditions, there was a certain comfort in not being alone. Priya clung to her grandmother, the flicker of the dying fire reflecting in her eyes. At some point, Lucas offered his coat to Mindy, who struggled against a cough that threatened to worsen in the cold. She thanked him with a raspy whisper, blinking back tears of gratitude. Tara, who had been warming her hands near the embers, looked around with a gentle smile. Just hours ago, they had all been strangers, but a bond was silently forming. The night wore on, and though the wind howled its fury outside, those inside the cabin discovered an unexpected warmth, greater than any fire or insulation could provide. In the early morning, they awakened to a chill that gnawed at their bones. Snowdrifts had climbed halfway up the cabin windows. Lucas, peering outside, reported that the road was entirely buried, making any immediate departure impossible. The day's light revealed the cabin's small stock of supplies with alarming clarity. Only a few pieces of firewood remained, and the meager food they had was nearly gone. Hunger began to weigh on everyone's minds. With a sigh, Tara volunteered to venture out and see if there was any sign of help or a nearby structure. Mateo insisted on coming along. As they bundled up, Mrs. Patel pressed the remaining half thermos of lukewarm tea into Tara's hands. "For strength," she said quietly. Tara thanked her, heart warming at the older woman's generosity. Emboldened, she and Mateo stepped outside, bracing themselves for a fight against the whirling snow. Once out in the open, they found the landscape nearly unrecognizable. Trees drooped under the weight of thick ice, and waist-high drifts obscured any path. Tara and Mateo trudged slowly, calling out in hopes of hearing a human reply. Only the shriek of the wind answered. Eventually, they stumbled upon a small tool shed near a cluster of pine trees. Inside, they discovered a few old, splintering wooden crates, at least enough to burn as firewood. They also found a spare shovel. Encouraged by this modest find, they loaded what they could carry. On the return trip, they nearly got lost in the whiteout. The sense of relief that washed over them when the cabin's dark silhouette came back into view was immense. They burst through the door, cheeks burning with cold, and held up the crates like a triumphant gift. Their discovery provided a glimmer of hope in the oppressive storm. With the additional wood, the fireplace revived from its sluggish embers, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Everyone's spirits lifted just a bit. Later that morning, as the wind's roar quieted to a persistent grumble, they huddled around a new plan. Lucas, who had some experience in carpentry, started breaking down the crates into manageable pieces of fuel. Meanwhile, Mrs. Patel recalled reading about ways to melt snow for drinking water. She and Mindy collected clean pans scattered around the cabin and began the slow process, setting them near the fire. Priya offered to stir the melting flakes, carefully removing any stray pine needles. In a spontaneous gesture of gratitude, Mindy gave her last protein bar to Mateo, who had risked the blizzard with Tara. Though the bar was small, the thought behind it was enormous. Watching these tiny acts of kindness, Tara felt an unspoken camaraderie forming. To pass the long hours, they started sharing stories more openly. Lucas regaled them with humorous anecdotes from his years working as a traveling salesman, reminiscing about the time he was stranded in a roadside diner for days due to a flood. Mrs. Patel described her childhood in India, where monsoon rains brought communities closer, forcing them to rely on each other in much the same way. Priya joined in, softly at first, recounting how she had learned to draw animals to cope with her grief. Encouraged by the group's attentiveness, she sketched a small rabbit on the back of a used envelope, eliciting admiring murmurs. Mindy spoke of her dream to start a children's choir in her hometown once she landed a stable teaching job. Listening, Mateo gently admitted how the pain of his recent breakup had left him feeling unworthy of companionship. Across the cabin, heads nodded in empathy. As evening fell again, they grew anxious. The howling wind returned in fits and starts, sizing up its next assault. Tara suggested a small game to distract them from the worry. They formed a circle and invented stories, each person adding a sentence, weaving a silly but imaginative tale. Laughter bubbled up as the plot grew more and more absurd, featuring magical cats and time-traveling knights. Even Priya giggled as she contributed whimsical lines. Their breath came in warm puffs, their hearts lighter for a while. Outside, the storm had other plans, intensifying once again with giant gusts of swirling snow. But within the cramped walls, companionship enclosed them like a protective layer. At night's close, they rearranged their makeshift bedding. They slept closer together than ever, limbs occasionally tangling, but finding each other's presence oddly comforting. A sense of unity enveloped them, as though they were family. The next morning, they woke to a startling stillness. Sunlight filtered through the small windows, illuminating swirling motes of dust like tiny crystals. The storm had subsided. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the snow shimmered across the landscape in drifts that looked almost gentle. With cautious excitement, Lucas and Tara opened the door. The world outside felt transformed, wrapped in a quiet hush. Using the shovel Mateo had found, Lucas cleared a path from the cabin door to the main road. Although the road remained largely impassable, a thin set of fresh tire tracks suggested that a snowplow or a car had come through. Word traveled quickly among them. Rescue might be near. One by one, they ventured out, blinking against the stark brightness. Mrs. Patel hugged Priya, pointing toward the hills, with renewed wonder. Mindy's eyes brightened as she checked her phone, discovering a faint signal. Mateo exhaled in relief. This long, tense interlude in their separate lives was finally nearing its end. In that brief window of calm, they paused to embrace. Phone numbers were exchanged with the promise to stay in touch. Each departed, carrying a warmth far greater than the fire's heat. Outside, glistening drifts sparkled with renewed hope.